Welcome, folks, to another episode of That Anita Live, emotional healing to help you create a happier life. I'm Anita, your host, and this week we're discussing free-range parenting. In 2014 and 2015, parents in Maryland were investigated for allowing their children to walk home from a neighborhood park. The children were picked up by the local police and the parents were investigated by CPS. How did Danielle Meitiv fare with CPS? Were her children scarred by the events? Have they healed? Let's find out. Hi, Danielle.
Hi, Anita.
How are you?
I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you very, very much for coming to the show.
It's really a pleasure.
Now, let's start with the very first day. 2014, It's in December near Christmas, right?
Yep.
And your kids go to the park to play. How did you find out they had been picked up by the police?
Well, actually, I was in New York City. At that time, it was December 20th, and I was at my cousin's 50th wedding anniversary. And I got a phone call about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, my son crying, saying, "Mommy, the police are here and Daddy's going to be arrested." So I found out miles away when I couldn't do a darn thing about it. It was horrifying.
What did he sound like on the telephone talking to you?
Oh, he was crying. He was terrified. There were police in the house. He said something that the police had come inside and they'd said something about shots are going to be fired. And then I said, okay, give the phone to Daddy. I spoke to my husband and he's, trying to be, he's calm, but it's scary. And by the time the police finally left, first they wouldn't let the kids go in the house. They kept demanding ID, demanding, what is he doing? Why are the kids out? And then when they finally let the kids go in, there were 6 police officers and 5 police cars, just for 2 kids walking home from the park.
Wow.
Yep.
How did the investigation start? Because it wasn't just a question or 2 from the police officers and then they left. It was a full-fledged investigation by CPS, correct?
So the kids were walking home. My husband had dropped them off at the park, and they were on the way home from synagogue, and they said they wanted to go to the park. And he thought, okay, you can walk home. It's a mile. You know the way. But they left. They probably played for, I don't know, half an hour or something. And then they only got halfway home because somebody had called 911. So the police picked them up and brought them home. And that's, of course, where that scene happened. And then they left and left the kids there. But then that evening, a social worker from Child Protective Services showed up and told my husband he had to sign a safety plan that said that children would not be unsupervised at any time until CPS could follow up again. And he said, I'm not going to sign anything without my wife seeing it, without a lawyer seeing it. And they said, if you don't sign it, we're going to take your children away right now. And he should call the police again. So, of course, he signed it. So, that was the beginning, was being threatened with having our kids taken away.
Right. How invasive did they become into your life during the investigation?
Well, that's what's so frightening about, we often think Child Protective Services, like it sounds so nice, right? Of course we all want to protect children. Unfortunately, there's a lot of good that CPS could do. There's also a lot of harm that comes to families.
Yes.
There's a big gray area because it's not really a criminal investigation, so you don't have the same rights that you have in a criminal investigation. They have an enormous amount of power. And in some cases you want them, right? If the child's being truly abused,
right,
you want somebody to step in. But you also want some common sense where people can say, this child is not in harm's way, let's back off. So, what really sort of started the next sort of escalation is they wanted to come in and inspect our house and interview everybody who lived there. And I thought, our children were walking home from the park. You don't need to inspect my basement. And it's just very invasive. It's what happens, and I've spoken to parents all over the country and also advocates all over the country who stand up for parents. And it's a really shaming process.
Because it became a very national debate.
Yeah, and it's
in every barbershop, in every hair salon, in every parent-teacher meeting. There was this discussion between whether or not kids had the freedom,
right,
and whether or not they had the maturity to be able to play at their neighborhood parks or walk home. And those of us that found the headline in the news story marveling was because we remember being outside playing all day, and even during the summers, getting on our bicycles or, you know, walking away from the house around 9 o'clock in the morning, and we didn't return until street lights. I mean, that's where the popular phrase came from, is because we actually did have to be home by the time the street light came. It wasn't something that was just placed in a movie. It was an actual time period that was used where we had to be home. Why do you think it's such a national hot button?
Well, like you, I grew up the same way. I grew up in New York City like that, so it wasn't just a rural thing or in, you know, calm, quiet streets. I mean, of course, I've thought about this a lot since that happened, and I think there's a few things. One is that we don't know our neighbors enough. We don't feel as invested in our communities. I think families are working much longer hours. They're feeling a lot less economically secure, so they have those extra jobs and their extra commuting time. So they're not at the block party or the PTA, and they just don't have the time. So there's this sense of they just don't know what's going on. What's really striking is not just when you walk around, you don't see any kids playing in the street. Right. They're nowhere. They're not at playgrounds, they're not on the street. But you know what's really amazing is once you step outside of a downtown area, you don't see adults either. I grew up with people sitting on their porches at night, and they have their iced tea, and and all the kids would come play on their lawns. You knew your neighbors, and we're not even the adults are out there. So many of us have retreated into our homes, behind our televisions. We go from work to the car, to the house, to the TV, and we don't engage. So we get this feeling that like public spaces are kind of the scary no man's land, and that we've all retreated from. And I think one way that we're going to change that fear, I don't think it's real. I mean, crime is lower today than it certainly wasn't when I was a kid. I mean, I grew up in New York City in the 70s and 80s. It's much safer in Silver Spring, that's for sure. But the fear is real. So I don't want to put down parents that are scared, because we all have this sense that something's changed.
It's a natural concern that they have.
Right. But the way that we're going to get over that fear is by re-engaging our communities and taking back our communities and getting to know our neighbors and our local shopkeepers, and realizing it's even safer than it was when we were kids, frankly.
Yeah. Were your kids scarred at all by?
It was scary. I mean, the first time they were brought home by the police, there was a second time in April after we had been charged and we had appealed it. A few months later, we thought, okay, it's all quieted down, and they were driving home from my in-laws. They'd been in the car for 6.5 hours, and they said, "Can we go to the park?" And we're like, okay, right? Like, it couldn't happen again. And of course it did, and that was really, really frightening. They stopped to talk to somebody, pet his dog, and then he followed them, called 911. So they were scared because some guy was following them. And then the police came again, 3 police cars and 4 police officers come. They told my son, hey, get in the car, we'll give you a ride home. And my son said, I don't want to get in the car. We just live 2 blocks away, you can walk us home. And the police said, no, get in the car, you have to get in the car. So we'll take you home, and then they didn't. They held the kids in the car for 2.5 hours, locked in the back of a car, because you can't get out of the back of a police car. No food, they weren't allowed to call us. My daughter wanted to use the bathroom, they wouldn't let her use the bathroom. And they kept saying, we're gonna be late, we're gonna get in trouble. And then instead of taking them home, they took them to CPS. And that's when my son said he just broke down. I mean, that was terrifying. Then they locked him in a room for another 3 hours and didn't tell them that we had been called, didn't tell them we were coming. And my son told me he actually thought he was never going to see us again, that he was going to go to an orphanage, is how he put it, in the morning. So that's really traumatic. And it's just so, the thing that still gets me this day, it was like the people who are supposed to be protecting the kids. Here they're investigating me as if I'm a bad parent. And my kids are still, they've healed very well. Children are amazingly resilient, but they remember it.
So did they have any type of counseling to help them?
Absolutely,
get through
especially if that second time. I mean, my mother was a social worker. We have lots of psychologists and psychiatrists in our family. I'm a big, big believer in getting mental health support when you need it. So we, in fact, went to a therapist that we knew in the neighborhood we had met with before, and she really treated the kids as if they had PTSD. I mean, she walked them through what happened, really helped them connect. My son had felt really deeply ashamed about that he didn't stand up for himself. I mean, this 10-year-old kid.
Right.
I said, you don't stand up for yourself to police. And he felt ashamed that he cried in the back of the police car. And she said, a lot of grown-ups have cried in the back of that car. So you have nothing to be ashamed of. I'm incredibly proud of how they handled the whole situation, how they stuck together, how my son looked out for his little sister. But we definitely needed to talk about it. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, because the story is coming back out, because I'm running for office, it's still, they're still processing it. It was 2 years ago, but what does that mean, and what's changed, what hasn't changed, how do we feel about it?
Were there any particular techniques that you noticed as a parent that the counselor, the therapist used to help them with the PTSD?
I think it was really talking through, just what happened, how that might have felt. Because it was interesting when I spoke to my son, like the words ashamed came out from him. When like the therapist was wonderful at really understanding, what did that feel like? What did you say? She has to be fantastic when it comes to talking to children. But really just an incredible amount of acceptance to whatever, just an understanding that what they went through was hard. And it's okay to have difficulty handling it.
Because a lot of children now, because of a lot of the aggression that we see in the news between communities and police officers, have a fear of police officers. I mean, just the sight of them put some children into a very fearful, anxiety type of stance.
So for the first few months, especially when we were going through it, and I'd say for at least a year afterwards, whenever my children saw the police, they would kind of say like, oh, there they are. Oh, like they would notice every single police car that passed. I mean, they were always hyper aware of the police being around. Even now, they say, and it's really awful, but they say they don't consider the police their friends. And it's unfortunately, I mean, I realize there's a lot of communities of color, especially, who feel that way, and it is really sad because these are folks, both Child Protective Services and the police, that we should be able to rely on to protect us.
Did you feel any genuineness during the investigation, like they were really just concerned about the children, or if it was more of just following the letter of the law?
Unfortunately, I felt like the latter. I mean, I felt like it was very odd to me because, especially when we spoke to them, and then the second part of the investigation, there had been so many TV cameras in my living room, and so many people had spoken to me. Really, if we had any skeletons in our closet, they would have found them. So I just thought, at some point, somebody at CPS is going to say, this is such a waste of resources and time. Let's go find somebody who needs it. And instead, it was like, nope, this is what we do, so we're going to keep doing it, even though, there's nothing here that indicates neglect. It was more that it was almost like, well, you let your kid walk, we call that neglect, therefore you're negligent. Not, you let your kid walk, and we're here to worry about kids who are harmed or who are in imminent danger of harm. This child wasn't. Let's move on. And that's what was so upsetting to me. I mean, one of the things is there was no person. I felt like I was dealing with a bureaucratic machine and not, wow, we really care about kids' welfare and that's why we're here. It was, you have to do this and we're just going to march through these orders. And that was really
sad,
frustrating and sad. One of the things that's really, horrifying to me, and I've spoken to a lot of parents and a lot of lawyers and advocates who work in the system, is that it seems that so many times the thing that is most discounted is the love and the bond between a parent and a child. It's like, oh, we can just take this child and put them in foster care, and they're getting meals and clothing, so what else do they need? Like, oh, I don't know, the love of their own parents or their extended family, their grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, but they're like, like a child's like a little robot or something. So they, in some way, they just couldn't understand just how upset I was or how upset the children were. Like, these are my kids. Like, I think the idea that parents who love their children really, so I'm sure there are times parents, we all make mistakes, but that bond is the most precious thing, and that even in the situations where parents are negligent, we should still work to help them keep that family together rather than punish. And that's what I felt like. I felt like we were being punished for crossing some line, not, oh, what's the best thing for these children?
All right, because it really ends up tearing apart the family versus teaching the members of all of the members of the family. Right. Not just the child, but all of the members of the family, how to be a more cohesive unit.
And even, overwhelmingly, neglect, this unattended children, this is one of the charges that gets a lot of parents caught in this system. And even if you do have cases where parents are not parenting as well as the children need, overwhelmingly, you find that those parents still care. But for whatever reason, whether it's lack of financial resources, emotional resources, they're not doing the best that the kids need. But in so many cases, those parents want to do better. So rather than punishing them, why not use literally the same resources to actually improve that family? And it just doesn't seem like that's the priority. It is on paper, but not in the system, and that's horrible for many families.
Now you're getting ready to move into a position to do more about that.
Right. Well, I'm happy to say that 2 years ago, actually 2 of the major policies that got us in trouble were changed, or that were used to get us in trouble. One, the police have changed their policy. So when they get a call about a child, they don't automatically call CPS and say, oh, okay, somebody called 911, we must start an investigation with CPS. And also they have some more discretion to say, oh, hey kids, are you okay? You're not lost? Great, have a good day. I mean, obviously there's still issues with the police having that discretion, but it's better than automatically assuming somebody called you about a kid, you must take them into custody. And this has happened a number of times now since then, so I know at least it's working in our neighborhood. I have a number of friends their kids have reported just the police officer saying, hey, is everything okay? Great, have a good day. And that's what you'd hope. You would want that, but that's what you'd hope for, is that relationship. People are keeping an eye on kids, so that's one policy that's changed. And also, Child Protective Services in Montgomery County no longer consider an unattended child to automatically be neglected. So parents can make those decisions to let their kids go to the park. Again, one, it can be a parenting decision. We have a very diverse county in Montgomery County. There's a lot of different parenting styles, and we shouldn't be saying this is the only right way to do it. People all over the world have been raising children very successfully. So if we have an older child watching a younger child, we have a group of kids at the park. I had people from all over the country, all over the world who live in the county saying to me, what's the matter with American kids that they can't go to the park? I don't know. So we changed that, I'm happy to say. But also being in that really woke me up to how important local politics are and being involved at the local level. So as you were just referring to, I'm not running for Montgomery County Council at large.
And with that, we'll be right back to hear more about her platform for Montgomery County Council.
Welcome to That Anita Live TV on YouTube. Here at That Anita Live, I share episodes about emotional healing to help you create a happier life. How do I do that? Through awareness, education, and most importantly, you, the community. By sharing tips and techniques from real people with real stories of overcoming trauma and abuse to live relentless lives. Hanging out with me, you'll laugh, you'll learn, but most importantly, you'll heal. Never miss a moment. Subscribe to That Anita Live's YouTube channel today. Subscribe via thatanitalive.com/YouTube.
And we're back. Why would you want to run for public office?
Well, because people like us, everyday people need to do it. I think, we see what happens today when you leave government, just to folks who have, crafted their whole lives around running for office. I think even good people forget why they're there. So we do need folks with everyday experiences. I mean, even beyond my whole experience with a free-range mom story, I'm a mom. I have 2 kids in the public schools, so I have a lot invested in our public education system. I live in Montgomery County, one of the most diverse counties in the country. So I have a real investment in making sure that our county is, really sharing resources with people all over the county, that whether it's our school system or environmental benefits, everyone in the county is really sharing in the richness of where we live. So, I'm a climate scientist by training. So I've spent 20 years working on environmental policy. I have a lot invested in making sure we leave a sustainable world for our children. And a lot of us think, oh, well, you know, Trump destroyed that when he pulled out of the Paris Agreement, or, you know, that we have to just do it at the national level. But a lot of the decisions we make on the local level affect climate change. They affect environmental health. So realizing that we can make a difference at the local level is really what prompted me to get involved. And, you know, everyday folks have to step up.
Well, what do you feel qualifies you for the position?
Well, it's a really good question. I think it's an interesting question. I've done a number of trainings recently ever since I decided to do this, and been reading up a lot. And I think it's a question that women in particular ask themselves. Because so often, you know, we hear like women always expect they have to be 99% qualified before they apply for a job. And, you know, it's often like for men, it's 40% or 50%. And women should feel that entitled too, right? A job should be something you grow into. So it's funny, I have to like remind myself, like, wait, I am qualified for this. I don't need to have an MBA and a JD and a PhD, right. And but what qualifies me is that I'm a citizen of the county. Like I said, I worked on policy issues for 20 years. Really difficult questions. I mean, climate change, it's obviously not a simple issue. Like I said, I'm invested in the schools. I've taken the time to learn more. I'm now involved, I'm on my Democratic Central Committee in my county. So I would say to anybody who wants to run for office, you know, it doesn't mean that you wish you took the right path 20 years ago. You know, look for ways to get involved now, and those are your qualifications.
What are the biggest challenges facing Montgomery County right now?
I would say there's a few. I mean, and of course I'm going to put my hat as a parent and as a scientist. I'm always looking for the future. How do we have a more sustainable future? And that's not just environment. It's economically, it's socially. So Montgomery County is known as a very liberal county, and it's one of the wealthiest counties in the country. It's one of the most diverse counties in the country. When you actually look, and we have great schools, depending on what neighborhood you live in. So so I think one of the biggest challenges, and one of the issues, or even, you know, I wouldn't even broader than an issue that we have to deal with, is what the whole country is dealing with, and that is that we don't have the racial and economic equity that we say we value. And so looking at any of the issues, whether it's the economy, the environment, schools, how do we make sure that everybody is benefiting of every race, economic background, immigrants, for people born here, that your wealth or where you live doesn't determine your quality of life or how the education your kids get.
So how would you be able to impact those changes from a county council seat?
Well, it's a great question. On the economy, for example, we just, unfortunately, the county executive vetoed a $15 minimum wage increase. The council is dealing with that. It's coming up again. Hopefully that will pass before I even get there. But dealing with wages so that our lowest wage earners are actually earning enough to support their families. That helps with economic growth. Schools, you know, making sure that all of our schools have the resources they need, and not doing it like giving equal resources, but giving schools the resources they need. Making sure when it comes to like environmental equity, where are we building highways and where are we building public transit? Where do we have affordable housing? You know, making sure that, you know, we're not just developing these nice, you know, exclusive enclaves and gentrifying other folks out. So really making sure that any issue we look at through a lens of equity, I think is really critical for the council. And another thing so another example on education is starting kids earlier, and I would advocate for universal pre-K, which we know that DC already has, so that all kids get started earlier.
How do your kids feel about you running for office?
It was funny. Of course I sat down and talked to them about it. And, you know, it's a challenge. I mean, it takes a lot of time, and they're used to mommy being a lot more accessible and available.
Okay.
Because when my second child was born, I actually left where I was working at NOAA and started my own consulting firm, so I could be more around more often. Yeah. So this is a big change. But because we went through this really life-changing experience with CPS and the police, they understand how important it is. And that's what my son is very serious. He said, it's a big sacrifice, but we have to do this.
And how old is he?
He's 12. He's very profound. So, I mean, I think, they're excited about it. It's new, it's different.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
They're pretty excited.
Now, Montgomery County is a very transient area.
Some of it is. I think it's interesting because there's a lot of different Montgomery counties. I think a lot of people are really familiar with sort of Bethesda to Silver Spring, like the DC border, maybe
Right.
Rockville. A third of Montgomery County is actually an agricultural reserve, a really large agricultural area and rural area in Montgomery County. Folks have been there for generations. There are a lot of people who come in, they're working for the government, so they move here. But a lot of people set down roots, and really, I've met a lot of people who were born and raised in Montgomery County. So it is a challenge of making folks who are coming feel welcome while making sure that people who've been there for a while don't feel like they're being pushed aside.
Right.
So, and then we have lots of immigrants. We welcome people from all over the world. So it's a challenge, but it's also, I grew up in New York City, in Queens, and so the richness and the vitality is really just part of what makes it such an exciting place to live. So
Now, the one question that, as a citizen, we always want to know is, are you going to raise my taxes?
that's always a great question. Government needs revenue to run, so I'm not going to, pretend that we can do it for free. On the other hand, right now, part of the reason why I'm running is we have 3 empty seats. We have 3 people on at-large seats that are empty, and then we have 1 incumbent running for re-election because a term limits bill just passed. And I think it's because, frankly, people were really upset at some of the tax increases we saw recently. And I don't think it's just I want to keep all of my money for myself, but we're just coming out of a recession. And so they raised the property taxes, and just because your house got more valuable on paper doesn't mean your income went up. So I think people were really still hurting. People may have recovered on paper from the recession,
Right.
but there's a lot more people in freelancing jobs. There's a lot more people who aren't getting federal jobs, they're getting contracting jobs. It's
Right.
just a lot less job security and economic security. So I think people were really hurting. And I'm part of the reason why we need new blood and new faces, and I don't think the folks in the office felt that and understood it. And I lived it. I was doing freelance work, and I used to be a full-time person, and then I started doing freelance, so it's hard.
Overall, what's your vision for Montgomery County, say over the next 10 years?
So my vision for the county is really a place where average citizens feel like they have a voice and feel like they're heard, that the bureaucracy doesn't feel like this black box that you're dealing with a machine. So that, and I would like not just for myself, but our whole government to feel that way, really formed by the people. But in terms of the county, again, I feel like Montgomery County can be a great place to live, and there's so much richness. Really want all of Montgomery County to benefit from that. So we don't feel like, it's lovely that we actually do have like villages and towns, and it does feel a little more intimate, but it shouldn't feel like, this is the rich town and this is the poor town, but rather we're all really shaping the future in a more sustainable. So I'd like to see our economy, our educational system, and our environment really be more sustainable so that we're planning for our children and our grandchildren.
So is this it in politics for you, or?
This is big. Was a big decision already. Montgomery County has over 1 million people and a $5.5 billion budget. So this is a pretty big thing to bite off here. So I'm just really excited to be running for county council, and that's all I'm focusing on. Like 6 months ago, I wasn't even sure this was my future.
To DC.
Right, it's true. I think Montgomery County breeds politicians like mushrooms after rain, but I'm focusing on local politics. One thing I think that this election's really taught me, and as well as my own experience with the police and CPS, is that it's so critical for us to invest locally. Not just, it's a nice stepping stone to something more important. This is what's important. The county is where we live, whether it's your county, your town, even your state delegation. We can do so much at the local level that we really need to keep more of our focus here where we live and where our neighbors live.
It's one thing to notice a problem. It's another to sit and complain, but it takes a special kind of individual to get up and do something about it. If you aren't happy with your life, if you aren't happy living in your neighborhood or living the kind of life you'd like to live, now is the time to get up and do something about it. Information is available everywhere. Never in any time in history have we lived in a time where we're so encouraged and equipped to follow our dreams. If you'd like to learn more about Danielle, visit
Meitiv, MEITIV 2018.com. And you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Danielle Meitiv.
I'm Anita, your host. Be sure to check out thatanitalive.com for where and when to see our next episode.